So what sets Silent Hill apart from most of its sequels is that the main character is kind of incidental. The monsters in this game don't represent Harry, but Alessa, who I'm going to talk more about later. But first I'm going to start with the monsters. Meet Silent Hill Dog 1.0. The Groaners are basically very large, emaciated-looking, hairless, dog-like creatures with rotted brownish skin. There isn't a whole lot to say about them. They're a pain if you get too close, but they're easy to outrun. I'm sure they're inspired by Cerberus from Resident Evil. But in this case, they symbolize Alessa's fear of big dogs. Air Screamers are why there aren't too many flying enemies in Silent Hill games. They are irritating as fuck. But an Air Screamer is the first monster you see in this game after the radio is introduced. Appearance-wise, they're based on pterodactyls, only with a more human-like legs and torso. Apparently Alessa read Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's book The Lost World, and the pterodactyls really stuck with her. Also, the Groaners and Air Screamers each have an otherworld counterpart, with the main difference being that their heads are covered with worms, and their coloration is a bit different. I honestly didn't catch on to that for a very long time and thought it was just the same enemies who just looked a bit different in the darkness. The Grey Child is an interesting one, as it's only in the North American release. The Japanese and European versions replaced it with another creature called a Mumbler. It was thought that the Grey Children looked too, well, childlike according to the censors. In the North American release, the Mumblers are only seen in the second sewer area. Personally, I don't think the Grey Children look all that childlike, more like short humanoids in general, but whatever. Either way, they mostly show up in the school and they represent the children who are mean to Alessa. There's also a dark, translucent type called a Stalker that shows up late in the game. The Grey Child is also the only monster from the first game to show up in the movie. And they were generally handled well. I thought their burning up at the end was a nice touch. And then we have Larval Stalkers. Tiny, dark, and translucent. And harmless. They represent how Alessa felt, helpless and without an identity. Plus, they sometimes cling to Harry the way a scared child would cling to a parent. Also, look how cute they are! Come on! Come on! Oh, he fell down. In an earlier version, they were flesh-colored. I can't decide which is cuter. Naturally, with this being a Silent Hill game, there is a hospital along with nurses. And looking back, how refreshing is it that they don't represent sexual repression for once? And or aren't wearing skin-tight uniforms with their boobs half exposed? Not that I mind that as a one-shot thing, when appropriate for the respective character, but boy did it ever get repetitive after a while. Like the developers forgot that they could look any other way. Anyway, I have to say that the nurses really freaked me out the first time I saw this one in the game. They're zombie-like in a way, but they're not like the zombies in Resident Evil who just kind of aimlessly mill about in your general direction like something out of an old monster movie. When a nurse spots you, she comes right at you with a huge knife raised above her head. There's just something disturbingly realistic and intimidating about that. Also, when I first faced a nurse, I happened to have the steel pipe equipped, so I proceeded to beat her to death like I had been doing with previous enemies. With the other enemies, the only way you can tell that they're still alive is that you continue to hear static on the radio. The nurses, on the other hand, writhe around on the floor in agony. That was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen in a video game. At that point, I realized it was like 4 a.m., so I shut it off and went to bed, and I'm pretty sure I remember having a vague nightmare about it afterwards. Anyway, in this game, they're generally hunched over with a kind of parasite growing out of their back, which is controlling them. And in this case, they represent how the medical staff was being controlled by the cult. I'll explain what I mean by that later. Also, what sets this game apart from the others is that along with nurses, there are also doctors. They're about the same, really, aside from the obvious physical differences. In the streets, you have to deal with rompers. I used to think they looked like thinner, long-legged bears, but they're actually humanoid creatures with brown skin like the dogs. They also appear to have a vertical mouth. Ew. They're also a complete pain in the ass, because the second one spots me, it always knocks me down. Apparently they symbolize Alessa's dislike of adults due to how forceful and overbearing they are. Another enemy is the Split-Head boss, which is inspired by a creature in another book that Alessa read. It looks vaguely lizard-like, and its huge vertical mouth is its weak spot. Also, when you turn on the boiler in the school's basement, it makes the same noise as the monster, so whenever Alessa heard the boiler come on at school, she imagined it was the sound the monster from the story made. Also, there's a split worm boss in Silent Hill 3, which was a callback to Splithead. This one obviously looks a lot more phallic. Most of the other creatures resemble various bugs and creepy crawlies that people tend to dislike. Giant cockroaches called creepers. The bloodsucker, which is made up of a trio of tentacles that resemble worms or snakes. The twin feeler boss, which is basically a giant poisonous caterpillar, which metamorphosizes into a giant moth called a float stinger. And in the sewers are hanged scratchers, which are insect-like with their long limbs that they climb with, but I always thought they looked reptilian due to their coloring. This could be a reference to dragons, since Alessa was into fairy tales. The final boss is officially referred to as Incubus, but is called God or Samael by Dahlia.
The mark of Samael.
It's apparently based on a very old pagan fertility god called Baphomet. It has the head of a bull or a goat with a long pair of horns, the upper body of a woman, its midsection is missing other than the spine, and it has hooves and a set of wings. Yeah, it's very pagan looking. It basically looks the way Dahlia imagined it. The version we see in Silent Hill 3 is based on how Claudia imagined it with Alessa's face. It bursts out of Alessa and you have to kill it by dodging its lightning attacks and shooting it. As final bosses go, it's fairly easy to kill. If you're getting the bad ending, you actually fight Alessa, but the gameplay doesn't change. So the main character, as far as who you play as, is Harry Mason. The game starts off shortly after his wife has died, and his daughter Cheryl talks him into taking her to Silent Hill, which is where he has to swerve to avoid hitting a girl crossing the street, and crashes his vehicle. Cheryl is gone when he wakes up, so he spends pretty much the whole game trying to find her. Harry is not a super interesting character, but as I've said in other videos, I dig him anyway, at least as a concept. He lost his wife, and his daughter is pretty much all he has, so naturally he goes to hell and back for her.
Daddy? Help me. Daddy? Where are you?
Cheryl!
By the way, this bit where he slowly hangs up the phone gets to me every time. But anyway, I think that also affects how he reacts to the two women he meets in the town. He is really kind towards Lisa, and I like these moments where he finds her and they're all happy to see each other. It's kind of a nice break from all the horror. Also, when Sybil is injured late in the game, I'll explain that later, Harry takes care of her. Also, when I did that Still Gaming episode, I made a joke about this scene. The borderline sexism in this scene just kills me.
Wait. We don't know what's back there. I'd better check it out first.
I'm a cop. I should go.
Exactly.
No, I'm going.
No. Go into the kitchen and make me some pie. Which got me a lot of flack. First of all, obviously I was not being completely serious, but still I was trying to make a point that this scene has some unfortunate implications. Sybil is a cop. She's trained to handle disaster situations. Leather pants notwithstanding. What makes Harry, a writer, think that he's more capable of scoping out danger than she is? Well, it could simply be that being in this scary situation with a woman around subconsciously reminds him of the death of his wife. And that makes him a little uncomfortable, and he's overcompensating a bit, basically trying to protect her even though she shouldn't really need it in this case. The scene still makes me cringe a little, but mainly I just think it was handled badly. Sybil backing down doesn't help.
All right. I'll cover you from here.
A cop should be able to assert herself better than that. Not to mention that the very next conversation leads her to believe that Harry isn't in his right mind.
Do you know anything about... well, like some other world? It's like some kind of bad dream. It's like I was there, but not really. It's all a blur, like some kind of hallucination, you know?
Harry. You're tired.
But anyway, yeah, I don't actually think Harry is misogynistic or anything. That would go against the rest of his character. There isn't really a whole lot else to say about Harry Mason that I haven't already said in other videos. He's kind of the straight man surrounded by all this craziness. One of the reasons I love Shattered Memories is that it takes Harry and does some interesting things with him. A well-made Silent Hill movie could have done that, but we know how that turned out. I mentioned in my Silent Hill 3 video what his name was originally going to be, but I didn't do my homework, and so there was a certain nuance I didn't pick up on, so I'm going to mention it again and expand on it. According to the character commentary page in Book of Lost Memories, Harry was originally to be called Humbert after the main character in Lolita, but the English staff changed it because, quote, it was an uncommon name. How about the fact that they nearly named a devoted father figure after a child rapist? What the fuck, Japanese developers? Not to mention that Cheryl was to be named Dolores after the title character in Lolita, who is the victim of said rape. Seriously, what the hell?
Must be on drugs.
Although there is a blurb at the very end stating, I thought they're the same, but... which might be indicating that it was meant to be ironic since the two characters in Lolita were posing as a father and daughter, but weren't. Which I guess could also be said for Harry and Cheryl, since she isn't his biological daughter. So, I guess I kinda get it, but that still would have some pretty messed up connotations. Good lord, that would have been distracting. However it happened, I'm glad they didn't go that way. In any case, the actor who played Humbert in the Kubrick film was named James Mason, so Harry's last name most likely comes from that. I'm guessing that the protagonist in Silent Hill 2 being called James is coincidence, since everything I've read indicates that the name is a derivative of Joseph, which is linked to Jack the Ripper, but it's still kind of interesting. Speaking of actors, Harry was voiced by a voice actor who goes by Michael G, and aside from being known for saying this line...
Radio. What's going on with that radio?
He apparently also said this line.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you!
He was also the announcer in Ridge Racer. Kind of ironic considering how Silent Hill starts out.
Look, Harry. I really don't get what's going on. But if there's a chance we can save your daughter, I'm in.
Sybil doesn't really do a whole lot in this game. She's mostly just there to help move the story along. She gives Harry a gun early on, which is a really odd thing for a cop to do, but whatever.
And don't go blasting me by mistake.
And every once in a while they just kind of touch base. It seems that she doesn't see any monsters or the other world, so she apparently isn't pulled into Alessa's nightmare as deeply as Harry is.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Harry.
Oh.
Late in the game, Sybil is infected by the same parasite inflicting the nurses in the hospital, and you have to choose to either kill her or use a substance on her called aglaphotis that expels the parasite. If you do save her but end up with a bad plus ending, she literally slaps some sense into Harry and helps him escape.
Harry. Go.
If you save her and end up with a good plus ending and save, the next time you see the opening, Sybil is shown replacing Harry's wife, implying that they got together. However, there is absolutely no evidence of Sybil in Silent Hill 3, and therefore no indication of what happened to her after the first game, or which of the two good endings is canon. There is a lot of speculation, and it seems that not all of the developers agree on it. But Book of Lost Memories states that the good ending is canon, meaning that Harry had to kill Sybil on the carousel. Which sucks because damn, it's brutal. The only reason I can think of for this is that it is stated in Silent Hill 3 that the little pill in Heather's locket, which was given to her by Harry, is made of aglaphotis, which is why when she takes it, the god fetus she was carrying is aborted, in a similar way that the parasite is expelled from Sybil. So I think the implication is that Harry doesn't use the aglaphotis on Sybil, therefore he holds onto it and has it made into the pill for Heather years later. I'm not saying that's necessarily true. In fact, my first assumption was that Harry just found more aglaphotis at some point to make the pill for Heather, and I didn't think to question it until I saw this brought up on a forum somewhere. But it is stated to be rare and extremely difficult to obtain, so maybe Harry not using it on Sybil was the only way to give some to Heather later on. Either way, Sybil's backstory is expanded on in the Silent Hill play novel. She eventually became a cop because she witnessed her parents being shot to death when she was a kid. Also, I'm gonna admit something. Despite her being really stupid in the end, Sybil is about the only character that I thought was mostly handled well in the movie. It probably helps that she didn't have a whole lot of characterization in the game, so there was less for them to screw up. Either way, she was a badass. But yeah, I admit it, I actually do like Sybil in the movie. Don't get me wrong, I like her in the game too. She has a kind of swagger and body language that suggests attitude, and I get a kick out of that. But she doesn't really have a whole lot of screen time, and stuff happens to her more often than she actually does stuff.
Harry, tell me what's happening here. Where is everybody? I must have gotten knocked out. When I came to, everyone was gone. It's awful.
Now, Lisa Garland, on the other hand, we do learn what happens to her, unfortunately. She had worked for Dr. Kaufman, who got her hooked on a drug and had her taking care of Alessa. I know I haven't gotten to Alessa yet, but for now, I'll just say that taking care of Alessa was not an easy task, and it took a toll on Lisa's sanity.
I can't stand it any longer. I won't tell a soul. Promise. So please.
She tried to quit, but Kaufman took away the drug, causing her to hallucinate. By the time Harry meets her, oh boy, is she ever broken. She is stuck in the hospital's otherworld, is suffering memory loss, and is horribly afraid.
Harry?
But once she goes into the basement, she begins remembering that she is the same as the parasitized nurses that had been attacking Harry.
Harry?
And remembering that triggers a transformation, resulting in a famous scene that is as heartbreaking as it is horrifying. Poor Lisa. Go easy on Harry, by the way. He's not enjoying locking her up. He's just trying to save himself so he can go find his daughter.
Lisa.
Lisa was named after Judy Garland, who of course played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. There's kind of a parallel there in that Dorothy becomes lost in a dreamland, which is similar to what happens to Lisa, though hers is more of a nightmare. Lisa is voiced by Thessaly Lerner, who has actually been in a lot of stuff. Video game-wise, she's done a lot of voice work for The Sims, and she had a small part in Psychonauts.
She doesn't have time for an ugly little girl like you.
She's actually a great voice actor, which gives a bit more credibility to my theory that the voice actors in this game aren't necessarily bad, they were just given bad direction. As for Silent Hill 3, Lisa is clearly referenced at some points, but others are kind of controversial among fans. I didn't mention this in my Silent Hill 3 video because I thought it was just a rumor, so I ignored it. But over the years, I've kind of changed my mind, so I'm going to bring it up here. And the words of Masahiro Ito seem kind of vague on this. Just before the shift to the otherworld in the hospital, the nurse Lisa, who appears in the first game, can be seen. The purpose of including this is to show that Alessa's influence on the otherworld grows stronger as she regains her memories. It indicates that even after the first game, she continues to suffer in the otherworld. Now, is he just talking about the videotape, which we see again at this point?
Why? What is keeping that child alive?
Because immediately after that, there are various pictures of Lisa's smiling mouth, and near said pictures is a bound female figure who is being made to suffer in some way, near Valtiel. It doesn't look like Lisa, but she is wearing a nurse hat. She also shows up again later, still in the hospital, in a similar situation, only Valtiel appears to be doing something to her behind some black smoke and is barely visible, though some fans have managed to hack it so that you can see it clearly. And no, Valtiel is not going down on her because he's facing the other way. Of course, she does resemble the Silent Hill 3 nurses that you have to fight, but the fact that she's always near images of Lisa, to me that seems to imply that it's meant to be Lisa. One could argue that he's referring to just the videotape, but then he goes on to say this. Although a nurse appears in a similar fashion in the church as well, this does not have anything to do with Lisa. So it sounds like he's saying that this is Lisa, but this is not. They do look different. And yes, I'm aware that this same character was also featured in the short film Fukuro. Saying that's not Lisa, that's Fukuro lady makes about as much sense as saying Pyramid Head doesn't represent James's need to punish himself in Silent Hill 2, that's just Fukuro guy. What I mean is that Fukuro is just a bunch of imagery with no context, so pointing out that something was also in Fukuro isn't really an argument against it being something in particular in the games. I do recommend watching it, by the way. It's like Silent Hill Monster Orgy, the music video. It's only a couple minutes long and it's all over YouTube. Not to mention all kinds of fucked up.
Must be on drugs.
That said, I'm not necessarily saying that this is definitely Lisa. I'm just saying that I think that theory has some merit, and much as I'd like for Lisa to have some kind of happy ending, This just makes too much sense, all things considered.